Hi everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're going to follow James and Diep as they turn an old, dusty garage into DJ's first office, fight to buy corn at a better price for the villagers, and then climb a dangerous mountain road to collect pomelos, until one brutal bump sends Diep falling toward the ravine. Will James catch her in time? If you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. The morning mist was still hugging the mountain road when James stopped the old motorbike in front of the abandoned repair shop. The shutter was bent, the signboard was so faded you could barely read it, and dust floated in the sunlight like thin smoke. James took off his helmet, looked around and chuckled. If you just drive by, you'd think this is a haunted house, not DJ's future office, right? Diep climbed down from the back seat, clutching her small bag. She couldn't help smiling. It looks terrible, she admitted quietly, but the location is good. Right at the three-way junction. Easy for the villagers, James nodded. Exactly. Location is gold. The rest we fix with our own hands. He rolled up his sleeves and pulled at the crooked shutter. It screeched as it opened. Inside, broken tools, oily rags, cobwebs everywhere. The smell of dust and old engine oil hit them at once. Diep hesitated for a moment, then put her bag down, grabbed the straw broom leaning on the wall and started sweeping. The broom scratched the concrete floor, stirring up little clouds of dust. James dragged old shelves and rotten planks into a pile, the metal legs scraping loudly. "Can you pass me that hammer?" James pointed toward a corner. Diep snapped out of her thoughts, picked up the hammer and almost dropped it halfway. James caught it in time, their fingers bumping. Both of them laughed, the awkwardness suddenly softer. A moment later, when he moved an old paint can, a splash jumped up and landed right on his cheek. Diep noticed, lifted her hand, then quickly pulled it back. There's paint on your face," she said, pointing vaguely. James wiped his cheek with the back of his hand, smearing it even more. "Nice," he said. "Maybe this is the official look of a countryside CEO of DJ." Diep laughed out loud. Her laughter echoed in the empty garage, making the place feel less dead. They kept working in that simple rhythm. James fixed the broken door so it could actually close. Diep wiped the windows until the glass showed a clear view of the red dirt road outside. They dragged an old workbench into one corner, set up a simple wooden desk, and pinned a big map of the surrounding villages on the wall. James drew circles and arrows, marking roads, hamlets, and possible collection points. "This," he said, tapping the map with a marker, "will be our base. From here, DJ will fight for better prices for the villagers. No more mystery traders coming in, buying cheap, then vanishing." Diep glanced around again. It was still just a dusty room with a few pieces of old furniture. But now it had a desk, a map, and two people who believed something could change. It felt different. "Ready for your first trip as part of DJ's team?" James asked. Her heart skipped a beat. She nodded. By late morning, the mist had thinned. The red dirt road was still damp, full of bumps and ruts. James drove. Diep sat behind him, one hand holding the seat, the other gripping her bag. The destination, a farmer's house in the lower village known for corn. As they approached, they saw bright yellow cobs spread in the yard, sacks stacked by the wall, smoke curling up from the kitchen. An older man stepped out, wiping his hands on his shirt. His wife followed, eyes full of both curiosity and worry. "You're from the company?" the man asked, looking from James to Diep. "Yes," James said, getting off the motorbike. "From DJ. We talked on the phone yesterday about buying your corn." The farmer nodded, then went straight to the point. "I want 65. Traders from town sometimes pay that when the market is good." James didn't answer right away. He crouched beside a sack, loosened the string and checked the kernels. He grabbed a handful, let them fall back in, then pulled out his phone. "Today's market price is around 63, 64, he explained calmly, showing the screen. "If we pay 65, DJ's margin is almost gone." The man's face tightened. "If I sell at 63, I can't cover fertilizer and the money I borrowed," he said quietly. "I still owe at the shop." The yard fell silent. Chickens clucked in the background. The farmer's wife nervously wiped her hands on her pants. Diep stood slightly behind James, watching both of them. She knew exactly how that felt. A whole season of work hanging on one number that was always too low. James took a slow breath. "Uncle," he said, voice softer, "DJ isn't a rich company. If we lose too much on every deal, we can't stay here long term. We want to build something stable, not just make one lucky trade." The farmer's shoulders sagged. Diep felt her chest tighten. This was the usual ending. Market price wins, farmers lose. But then James looked around slowly, at the sacks, the small house, cracked tiles on the roof, the old motorbike leaning by the door. Something in his face changed. "All right," he said finally, "we'll pay 65 for this batch." Both the farmer and his wife stared at him, stunned. James continued, "But I want us to be honest with each other. We're doing this to build trust. Next season we sit down together, check the market price and agree in a clear way. If DJ earns, you know why. If you earn, we're happy too. Deal?" The old man's eyes suddenly lit up. "Deal," he said quickly. "If your company's willing to come all the way here and talk like this, we'll sell to DJ first." The wife's face broke into a real smile. "This money will help us pay the shop and buy books for the kids," she murmured. "Thank you." They started loading the sacks of corn onto the small truck that had followed them. Diep helped hold and tie the ropes, checking each knot. Her hands were busy, but her mind stayed on James's decision. When the last sack was in place, James turned to her with a half smile. "Do you think I'm crazy for paying above market price?" he joked. Diep shook her head. "No," she said softly. "I think they'll remember today. They'll remember DJ. And they'll remember you showed up." James looked at her for a second, then smiled. "That's the goal," he replied. "We're not here for one harvest. We're here for the long run." They climbed back on the motorbike, the truck full of corn rumbling slowly behind. As the farmer's house grew smaller in the mirror, Diep felt something loosen inside her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was just surviving. She was in a team, with a company that dared to care about the villagers' side of the story. And deep down, another thought quietly formed. Next time James went up the mountain to buy fruit, she didn't want to stay behind. She wanted to be right there beside him. The next morning, the sky over the mountains was a clear pale blue. In front of DJ's little office, James was tightening a rope around a small wooden cart hitched to the back of the old motorbike. He checked the knot, pulled it hard, then tested the cartwheels. 2 big rims, a flat wooden bed, sideboards darkened by years of dust and mud. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. Diep stepped out of the doorway, wiping her hands on her pants. "You're going up to the hill village today?" she asked. "Yeah," James replied. "There's a family at the top growing pomelos. They've never sold directly to a company before. I want to see if we can make it work." He was about to swing a leg over the bike when Diep spoke again, this time more firmly. "I want to go with you." James paused, one foot in the air. "It's a long ride," he said. "The road is steep, narrow, and honestly, dangerous. I can go alone." Diep shook her head. "If DJ's buying from the mountain villages, I need to see them too," she said. "I don't want to sit here waiting for news. I grew up on roads like that. I can handle it." For a moment he just looked at her. There was no fear in her eyes, only quiet stubbornness. He let out a small breath, half sigh, half laugh. "All right," James said, "but you're not sitting on the bike, you sit on the cart. I need full control of the motorbike up there." "Sit on the cart?" Diep blinked. He nodded at it. "On the way up it's empty. On the way back you'll sit with the pomelos and make sure they don't roll off. Deal?" She looked from the battered cart to the winding road, then smiled. "Deal?" The motorbike coughed to life, tucking the cart forward with a jerk. Diep climbed onto the wooden bed, sat between the sideboards and gripped the edge. From back there she could see everything. James's back, the thin red dirt road, the valley dropping away. Every bump made the cart rattle and her teeth knocked together. They climbed higher and higher. The path narrowed, curling along the side of the mountain. On one side, rock and bushes pressed close. On the other side, the land simply fell away into a deep ravine filled with trees and mist. "Still okay back there?" James shouted over the engine noise. "I'm fine," she yelled back, though her knuckles were white on the wood. The higher they went, the cooler the air became. A breeze brushed her face, carrying the smell of wet soil and wild grass. Below them, the fields and roofs shrank into tiny patches of colour. At a tight bend, James slowed almost to walking speed. "Hold tight," he warned. Diep leaned her weight toward the mountain. The cart creaked as the wheels climbed over rocks. For a second, the ravine felt unbearably close, and then they slipped past the turn. She let out the breath she'd been holding. "If we make it back in one piece, I'll give you a good review," she called. James laughed. "I'll take 5 stars and a thumbs up." The joke eased the tension, just a little. At the top, the path opened into a small clearing. A simple house stood there, with pomelo trees heavy with round green fruit behind it. The fruits glowed softly in the afternoon light. An elderly couple came out, followed by a boy carrying a basket. "You must be from DJ?" the old man said. "We weren't sure you'd really come up this road." James killed the engine and smiled. "We said we would, so we're here," he replied. "I'm James, this is Diep. Today we're here for your pomelos." Diep hopped down from the cart, her legs still humming from the ride. She walked among the trees, touching the fruit, listening as the couple explained how long they'd been growing them. They checked the pomelos together, size, skin, taste. The old man nervously named his price. James thought for a moment, did the quick math and nodded. "It's fair," he said simply. "DJ can pay that." The old woman's shoulders relaxed. "That money will cover the clinic and the school fees," she murmured. Soon everyone was moving. The family and a couple of neighbours picked fruit, filled sacks and baskets, and carried them to the cart. The boy ran back and forth, taking his job very seriously. Diep tied the sacks, stacked them tight and tested the ropes. The fresh, sharp smell of pomelo filled the air. Somewhere in the middle of all that motion, she realised she was happy. Tired, but happy. When the cart was almost full, James nodded toward it. "You ride with them on the way back," he said. "Guard the pomelos and guard yourself." "I will," she replied. They said their goodbyes. The old man took James's hand in both of his. "No trader has ever come up here," he said. "They say the road is too bad. Thank you for coming." James just smiled, eyes crinkling. The sun was starting to slide down when they began the descent. The light turned softer, shadows longer. Mist rose slowly from the ravine, thinning the edges of the road. Diep sat on top of the sacks, one hand gripping the sideboard, the other resting on the rope across her lap. Each bump made the pomelos shift slightly under her. From the back, she could see how tense James's shoulders were as he guided the motorbike downhill. The engine growled low, resisting gravity. "This part is the worst," he called. "Ground is soft near the edge. If anything feels wrong, shout." "Just don't show off right now," she called back, forcing a smile into her voice. "Relax, this is my serious mode," he answered. They rolled toward the same sharp bend as before. Now the corner was darker, half covered in shade. The soil there was worn into deep ruts by rain and wheels. "Hold on," James said quietly, slowing even more. Diep leaned in toward the mountain, fingers digging into the wood. She could feel the hollow space on the other side of the board, feel the pull of the drop even without looking. Then it happened. One cartwheel dropped hard into a hidden rut. The whole cart lurched. The sacks shifted. The pomelos under her rolled. James swore, fighting the handlebars as the motorbike jerked toward the ravine. The sudden shock tore Diep's hand from the sideboard. Her weight tipped, sliding toward the open air. Her hips slammed the top of the cart, then her legs slipped over the edge. "Diep!" James shouted. For one split second, she was weightless. She saw the sky, the thin line of the road and the dark, endless green of the ravine below. James let go of one handlebar, reaching back with one arm, fingers stretched as far as they could. Diep's hand flew out, trying to catch his, and before we see whether their hands meet